All of you, welcome to Michigan Haunts program today. Michigan's most haunted places will be explored by co-authors Joan Milan and Gail Milan, not Milan, sorry, Joan Milan. I got it, yeah. Joan Milan and Gail Offen in their latest book, Michigan Haunts, Public Places, Eerie Spaces, Arcadia 2019. Join the pair of Michigan Travel Chronicles as they take us on a road trip to the other side, exploring countless hauntings, ghost towns, and bizarre tales of murder and mayhem, drawing from more than 300 years of Michigan's modern history. The presentation and lecture will include many of Michigan's most baffling, noteworthy, and notorious hauntings featured in their new book, including the haunted buildings at Greenfield Village, Houdini's Detroit connections, the poisonings at Cass corridors, Alhambra, the strange phenomenon of the appalling lights near Watersmeet, and even paranormal activity at Detroit historic Fort Wayne. In addition, the pair will explore Michigan's most haunted graveyard and stop in for a bite of mystery at haunted eateries like Detroit's Whitney and Novi's Shiro restaurant. Through the course of the program, they will also explore haunted theaters, antique stores, and more. There will be time afterwards for questions and comments. Be prepared to add your own stories. Please, after the program, there is a chat box as well as question answer box. Please post your questions or anything through chat. And after the program, they will answer for all your questions. Thank you. I will hand it over to Joan and Gail now. Everything is yours now. Go ahead. And
okay. Thank you so much, Ilma. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're so happy to be here. We've never been in Clinton Township, and we hope to actually be there someday.
Right.
But we're so glad that we're able to talk to you folks tonight. And what a perfect time to talk about haunted things, because it's almost Halloween. So we're going to try and keep things light and not scare you too much. As we always like to say at the end, if you're scared, call us and we'll sing you a lullaby. So,
right.
But first, before we start the show, we wanted to just talk to you about why we wrote this book. Well, it's not showing up very well.
There it is. Almost there.
Yeah. So, John and I are historians. There you go. And we love to go around. We're not ghost hunters, okay? We're ghost story hunters. We don't have any ghost hunting equipment. I have a Cuisinart. I don't think that's going to help find any ghosts. But John and I have done books about local history, including Grand River Avenue, Michigan Avenue. And along the way, we found all these places that had haunted stories and legends. And we realized there was no book that talked about places you could visit that have haunted stories and legends. You've seen a lot of these ghost books and people have hauntings in their house. Well, you can't visit those places. So we decided to make a book of all places you could visit throughout Michigan, upper and lower peninsulas. It has an index at the end. So if you're in Bay City, you can go visit a haunted destroyer ship. So it's a lot of fun to discover the places around you in Michigan that you may have known about but didn't know they had haunted stories. And that's how we ended up writing it. And we're having a lot of fun with it. And we're going to take you on a little haunted journey around Michigan tonight. And at the end, please stick around. We'd love to hear from you. Any haunted stories or places you think should be in the book. We love to talk to people. So please stick around. And so without further ado and without further salesmanship.
But there it is.
Yes. And here's our book. And Michigan Haunts, Public Places, Eerie Spaces. And here we go.
Right. Now, the first place we love to talk about is not too far from Clinton Township. It's actually the northeastern section of Detroit, near Van Dyke and 7 Mile. It's a section of Detroit that was called Norris when it was originally settled, but it's where Mary Aganowski moved with her parents when she was only 16 years old back in the early 1960s. Now you see a picture of the two-way in the center of the screen there. That was actually open in 1876. And of course, the residents live upstairs. And Mary said right away they knew the place had some strange stories attached to it because her mother was kind of snoozing on the bed in the afternoon. And suddenly she realized there was a bearded man sitting on the bed staring at her. So obviously she screamed, and she described the man, as you can see in the sketch below there. And they did some research and they found out that it was indeed the man who built the place. His name was Philetus W. Norris. He was a colonel in the Civil War, been a spy. He was even one of the original superintendents of Yellowstone National Park. He must have loved the place because he and his daughter apparently loved to haunt the place. They're playful ghosts. And there's so many different stories about it, but one of the most fascinating is that Colonel's daughter loves to play games with the ladies' room door in the bar. And Mary noticed that right from the beginning because she went to use the restroom one night and the door slammed in her face. And then when she tried to open it, she could feel pressure pushing against it. Well, this happens a lot, and once in a while, they'll have a lot of fun watching some of these ladies who've had a few too many drinks try to go in the ladies' room. And after a while, they'll explain to her that, explain to them there's no one in there, but they have a good time watching it anyway.
This is considered the oldest dive bar in Detroit, and later on, if you've been there, tell us about it. Sometimes they see Philetus Norris himself wandering through the bar wearing a cowboy hat, so
Right.
That's kind of fun. Now, a little further here west, this is a place that many of you may have eaten at when it was called Home Sweet Home or the White House Manor. It's now called Shiro. It's an Asian restaurant, and it was built by, and get this, folks, the condensed milk king of Northville. And look at this fun ad we found on the right here. There must have been a lot of money in condensed milk. Because Charles Rogers built this big mansion in 1929. And he look at the on the bottom there. There's this big grand staircase, and he had this idea, a little bit like Gone with the Wind, where he decided when his daughter gets married, he's going to walk her down that grand staircase. Well, that ungrateful daughter eloped. Kids today. And he died of a broken heart, they say. And now when you go to this restaurant, it's a good restaurant, people sometimes will look up at the top there and they'll see Charles Rogers wearing his tux, waiting for the wedding that never will happen. And sometimes people even see him going down the stairs. And people see him all around the place. Poor broken-hearted guy.
They love to talk about their ghost there. And they also do at the new Hudson Inn, which is down on Grand River Avenue, right near Milford. And you see it there on the left. It hasn't changed much. It was built in 1831 to serve people running up and down the trail. And it still looks pretty much the same if you look on the upper right there. But apparently a lot of guests love to hang around and stay there long past their death because it is pretty darn haunted. Another interesting thing, though, in addition to the haunting, is when they were doing some renovation, they removed a support pillar in the main floor. And if you look at the picture at the bottom, you can see they exposed this huge opening in the ceiling, which was apparently a little secret room that no one knew about. I guess you'd access it by a ladder. Well, the New Hudson Historical Society came in and they said, this was actually a hiding place for fugitive slaves during the time of the Underground Railway. And lo and behold, they went in there and they unearthed, you see some pictures at the bottom left there of hats and shoes, bottles, all kinds of interesting items that were used for people who were using it when they were hiding out there. So it's a fascinating place, lots of history, and a lot of people that aren't there but are there, and you don't always see them.
Now, we have all kinds of different ghosts our shows, and we have a lot of fun with them, and we call this one the Grabby Ghost. This is way out in Jackson. This is a fascinating place. It's across from a Native American burial ground, and it's been around since 1831. Again, 1831 seemed to be a great year for building stagecoach stops. This is what it was also during Prohibition. It was a speakeasy. A mobster is supposed to be in that basement. But a fun story that the waitresses told us is there's a grabby ghost there because sometimes when they're serving, they feel a little pinch on their backside and they turn around to maybe smack the guy who did that. and nobody. So there's a very frisky, grabby ghost there at the Roadhouse in Jackson. Another fun story we heard is in the kitchen there on the left. Sometimes, and this happens apparently several times a year, the spice rack will come off the wall, not just fall, but smash across the room and smash all the bottles. And my theory is that maybe it's a ghost of a restaurant critic who thinks they're not seasoning their food correctly. But
Right. And just in time for some really spicy stories, we have the Cadieux Cafe. Again, this is on the east side of Detroit. Many of you may have actually gone there. It's been around since the 1920s, so it's going on 100 years. But it was originally a speakeasy. It's always been a Belgian tradition owned by Belgian folks. And they have steamed mussels and Trappist ales. And they have that wonderful variety of feather bowling that's kind of like bocce ball. You see it in the lower left-hand corner there. They have these alleys set up for people to bowl with big wooden wheels and feathers. Now, the Cadieux was purchased in the 1950s by Yvonne and Robert de Vos. They had just come over from Belgium. You see their pictures are still over the bar up in the upper right there. And when they died, they truly loved the place. And apparently they were too reluctant to leave as well. Ron says his mother especially is still there. He'll call the day manager in the daytime. And sometimes the person answering the phone is actually his mother. He says, I know it's her. I can tell by her accent. She'll say, hello. And I'll say, Mom. And then there'll be a staticky sound and dead silence.
And I always say that's a great son who calls his mother, even though she's dead, he still calls her. That's a good son.
Absolutely. Well, she's around. They see her drinking coffee and walking through the alley there. But all the people that work there have their own stories of hauntings at the Cadieux. There are many ghosts, apparently. And the bartender personally told us that one night when he was closing up, he looked over to his left and he saw a lady in this beautiful dress coming out of the ladies' room. And he said, ma'am, it's 2:00. We're closed. And he said the lady just looked at him stunned. And then she immediately burst into a million colors and just absolutely evaporated.
That's when you know it's time to go home.
That's right.
Now, this has been in the news a lot. This is Eloise Sanitarium, and John actually grew up near there, right, John?
That's right. I grew up in Westland, which was Nankin Township, back in the 1830s, way before I lived there. They moved the Detroit Sanitarium and Poorhouse from Detroit to this area, which was the middle of nowhere. Now, most of you have heard of Eloise. It is a place that is rife with hauntings, but it's notoriously a horrible place to have been sent. Obviously, it was a place to house the insane or the undesirable, people they just didn't understand. And since it opened in 1839 until 1900, it expanded to the point where it had 75 buildings stretched over 900 acres with 10,000 residents.
They had their own dairy. They had their own orchard. I mean, it was a self-contained city. You can even sometimes you can find on Etsy or eBay, you can find shoes that the residents made. But it was a place of great sadness because, you know, a lot of what we now know is dementia. People would just dump people off there, and it was very sad. And they threw away many of the records, so people don't even know who was there. That's the really sad part. And this is across the street.
Right. That's actually Eloise in the upper right there. She was named, she was the daughter.
Postmaster's daughter, right?
Yeah, no, the superintendent, right. And now, if you were sent to Eloise and you were not claimed by your loved ones, and a lot of people were just forgotten there, you were buried in a pauper's grave across the street. And this was basically an unmarked grave, unless you count marking it with a brick with a number on it. And there's one of them right there. There are actually 7,000 of these graves across the street from the asylum. And unfortunately, so many forgotten souls there. No wonder it's a place that is considered very haunted. And we have our own exclusive here.
This is an exclusive, folks. This is going to make it worth tuning in for.
That's
John
right.
took pictures at Eloise.
Actually, I took several pictures at Eloise. This is an area, if you look on the left, that was where there were several buildings. It was, you know, it was such an expansive area covered by this hospital. And usually when I took pictures, you didn't get anything odd back. But in this case, if you look at the area that we circled, there was something along the fence that really startled me when I got the film developed. And I blow it up here in the middle of the screen at the top. And by golly, you tell me if this doesn't look like a lady in a long black dress with a hat staring at me, and you can see the cross hatching of the fence in front of her. So she's definitely there. Some people say they see a little person behind her kind of materializing too. I took the color out, and if you see it at the bottom, it's a pretty creepy picture. A lot of the ghost hunters in the area wanted a copy of this because they were stunned by it. And what's interesting is there was nothing like that there when I took the picture, but I wanted to make sure, and I went back the next day, and by golly, there was nothing there like that. So it was a pretty creepy thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If we were in person, we'd point to it with a pointer. Now, of course, maybe you've heard of Eloise in the news because they're giving tours there. John and I toured it before it became a haunted attraction. And if you've been on this tour, tell us about it. We haven't been on it, the new fancy tour yet. But what was fun is that Alice Cooper a few weeks ago came to town and they named the street there next to him, Alice Cooper Court. So we thought that was interesting. Now, the guy who bought it wants to turn it into a so-called haunted hotel. So we'll see if that happens. But it's a pretty interesting use for it. Now we're going to go across the state all the way to Allegan. Maybe some of you have been to this bar called the Grill House, built in 1836. This was a boarding house and restaurant for lumberjacks, and one was buried on the premises. They're not sure of his name, but they decided to call him Jack because, and here's another kind of ghost. This is a generous ghost, a ghost who likes Jack Daniels because apparently they find shots of Jack Daniels on the end of the bar that are unclaimed, and they claim that this lumberjack, the ghost of the lumberjack, was very friendly and apparently has an unlimited bar tab because he leaves Jack Daniels out for anybody who's there. So if you go by there, maybe you can score a free shot. Now, out by me is this place called Mellus Hospital. You've probably never heard of it, but it just looks so creepy. We had to include it in here. It's built in 1931. And it was a hospital and a morgue for that area. And it subsequently went on to be a lot of other things, a teen rec center, even a chocolate shop. And now it's the Chamber of Commerce for Brighton. But what we found particularly creepy about it was we went down to the basement and you just sort of, where the morgue was, and you just felt this weird presence. And they tell us that a lot of times in meetings, they'll feel somebody pressing against their chest. And the people that work there don't like to work late at night because they will see unexplained people and shadows walking through, sometimes even people dressed in hospital gowns because it was a hospital and morgue. But look in the bottom left there. That's my hand. You guys, they have this chute where the body parts, when they would amputate limbs, they would throw them down the chute into an incinerator below in the basement morgue. The chute's still there that says body parts. So we just thought that was pretty icky and we had to include that. And look, to the right, you can even see the creepy staircase that goes down to the morgue. So lots of hauntings around there. And now we're in Grand Rapids.
And speaking of amputation, that's a popular thing on Halloween, I guess. Now, down in Grand Rapids, there was a famous mansion called the Judd White Mansion. You see it there in the upper left. And it was notoriously haunted. Why? Because in 1909, Warren and Vashti Rowland were found dead in the house. Now, Warren Rowland, pardon me, was injured in a railroad accident in 1907. His leg was amputated, and he had a prosthetic. And at that point, he decided that his wife was stepping out on him. You know, he was getting jealous, and he would go off on a drinking binge. And one night when she came home, he struck her over the head with his prosthetic leg, knocked her unconscious. He turned on all the gas, and they were together, found 2 weeks later, having committed a murder-suicide. Now, from that point on, there was screaming heard from there. There was all kinds of mayhem. No one would rent the place. No one would buy it. And eventually, about 12 years later, or actually about 13 years later, they tore the place down and they sold the property to Michigan Bell. And you can see the Michigan Bell building that replaced it still there. But from the time that Michigan Bell building was built until even now, there are all kinds of strange phone calls traced back to it that are women. There's a woman that screams that there's something going on at 112 Division Street, which is, of course, the address. They get there, it's the Michigan Bell building. And as I say, people are calling for help, and it's all traced back to this building, and they don't understand why. So apparently Vashti is calling for help.
And here, if you're ever in the Irish Hills, we have the wonderful Walker Tavern. Now, this was, again, a stagecoach stop and built in 1832. It doesn't look like it has a very good TripAdvisor rating, at least back then. And I'll show you a picture of what it looks like now. But this is something interesting they did here around in the 1920s, is that they've decided to make part of the place into a tourist attraction. Now, if you look at this card to the bottom here, number 12, or what looks like number 12, says murder room. Admission 25 cents. What do you get for your 25 cents, folks? Well, check this out. There was a card player there at the Walker Tavern one night. He played cards, went up to his room, but he was never seen again. And next to his bed was a blood stain. And they decided, instead of cleaning up the room, we'll turn it into a tourist attraction. So as you can see there, there's a card, there's a bottle, maybe enhanced a little bit. So before the internet, before there was entertainment, folks, you paid a 25 cents and you got to see a murder room at the historic Walker Tavern. And it was a big tourist attraction around there. And here's what it looks like now. You can see that they fixed the place up a little bit. It's actually a pretty nice looking place now.
Yeah, it's a registered historic park. And apparently it's quite haunted, because in 2010, Jeff Westover, who is a ghost hunter, he might have a Cuisinart, but he certainly has some ghost hunting tools. He set up a camera that was triggered to take pictures whenever there was movement, and no one was in the building overnight. And you can see that from time to time, he captured some strange objects going across the hallway there. If you look on the right, very strange.
John and I argue about this. Some people think it's ghostly images. I think somebody's getting Kleenex. But, you can think whatever you want. If you're a skeptic, not a skeptic. And I hope some of you have had the chance to go out to the Holly Hotel. It's interesting. As we said, all the places in the book are places you can visit. Some are more fun than others. And the Holly Hotel is a place that's really proud of their ghostly history. My gosh, they have a list of like 10 ghosts, they say, come through. Everything from a Native American guy to a cigar-smoking chef. There's a dog ghost, even the ghosts of some little girls that were run over by horses, unfortunately, at the livery stable next door. So these ghosts regularly appear in and out of the kitchen. But the Holly Hotel is most famous for Carrie Nation, who you see in the upper right there. She was someone who before Prohibition, or she helped bring Prohibition on, she would go around and take an axe and chop up bars. And the Holly Hotel is very proud to say the Carrie Nation came in the teens of the 20th century and chopped their bar up. So it has great food. It's a cool Victorian place, and it's got its own share of fun ghosts to visit. Now here we are in Clare, and we're going to tell you about some other ghosts, another interesting kind of ghost. But with this hotel, and this is still there, folks, you can stay there. It's a very cool hotel built in the 20s. It's called the Doherty. And this was a place that the Purple Gang, the very famous Purple Gang, used to hang out. When things were too hot in Detroit, they'd hightail it out to Clare. Why? No one would bother them there, and they had a speakeasy. They could brew illegal liquor during Prohibition and not get caught by the cops. They felt very comfortable there, so comfortable that one of the Purple Gang murdered one of the other Purple Gang in the tap room of the hotel in broad daylight. They had a feud about an oil lease, and you can see on the upper left the tap room. That's where the murder occurred, and the guy's ghost haunts the hotel. You can look at the bottom left. The Purple Gang were kind of a camera shy gang, I guess you'd say. And you can see their we call it the happy hour room, where they would brew their illegal liquor. Even if you look online, folks, there's an escape tunnel out of the hotel where if the cops did come, they could get out of there. But our favorite thing is the ghost of Mrs. Doherty, the wife of the man who built the hotel. You can smell her sometimes. and people will be walking through the halls and be overwhelmed with, and women, you have to be of a certain age to remember this, Jungle Gardenia by Tuvache, that very cloying, heavy scent. You can smell this ghost throughout the hotel.
Mm-hmm. Nothing like gangsters and smelly ladies.
Here's one of my favorite stories in the book, because this is really interesting. This was considered sort of the OJ trial of its time, even though it occurred in 1905. This is down by the new Little Caesars Arena, down by the Masonic Temple, too. It's called Alhambra. These are apartments that were very fancy at one time. In fact, the whole 5th floor of these apartments were owned by Harvey Firestone of Firestone Tire fames. Very fancy address in Detroit. And they used to have a cook, and she was demoted and to being a scrub woman. She was not happy about that. And she baked one last treat for the residents in the apartment buildings, biscuits, with a secret ingredient, which was arsenic. And 40 people were poisoned, 2 people died, and they put her on trial. Now, I'm going to show you her, folks, and I hope you have a strong stomach for this picture. This was the best picture we could find of Rose Barron, the suspect. And they put her on trial. And this is, even though it was 1905, it was considered the trial of the century so far. She had a very good lawyer, but every day newspapers across America would give the story of Rose Barron. Well, Rose was acquitted. Her lawyer persuaded the jury that the poisoning was caused by faulty plumbing, and so she was set free. And a few months later, she was accused of poisoning her father-in-law with, you guessed it, arsenic. But people who go by the Alhambra will sometimes hear crying coming out of the window. They sometimes see children's faces. We hope that someday the people that bought it will restore the building to its former glory.
Now, out in Grand Rapids, we have the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel. It's a beautiful hotel, and I've even stayed there. You can look out over the Grand River and see the lighted bridges. It's beautiful, but it has some haunted beginnings. Actually opened as the Grand Pentland Hotel back in 1913, and shortly after it opened, a young girl named Mary Manco was killed, actually decapitated by the elevator. You see the elevators down there in the lower right. And apparently, sometimes world-weary travelers will get on that elevator late at night, and they'll see a young lady just kind of staying to herself in the corner. And sometimes when they turn back around, she's gone. It's a very creepy thing. There's a little boy that wanders the hall and then disappears. But it's a beautiful hotel. You see in the lower left there, it has the most gold leaf ever used in a ballroom. It's a beautiful place. Just don't mind the ghosts.
Now, John and I went to a lot of lighthouses, and almost all of them have these sort of haunted stories. And you understand why, because you have to think about lighthouse keepers who would have to keep these lights lit 5 or 6 times a day in very terrible weather conditions in very remote parts of Michigan. But here's another interesting fact about lighthouses in Michigan.
Yeah. Michigan has the most lighthouses of any state in the United States. And currently it has about 104 that are still in existence. Now, every one of those apparently has a haunted story, and we discovered many of them. Probably one of the most famous is the old Presqu'île light, not to be confused with the new Presqu'île light, which is also apparently haunted. They're both near Alpena. Now, the old Presqu'île light does appear once in a while on news programs because of all unlikely things, even though it was decommissioned over 100 years ago, it has no visible means of illuminating. It still does illuminate. They see it out in the lakes. They see it in Alpena. They see it in the park. They actually have news crews that have filmed it being lit in the middle of the night, and no one knows why it's lit. Now, some say it's the old lighthouse keeper who won't give up the ghost, but we don't know.
And what John means by decommissioned is they took out the lens that's actually in there. So it has no lens and no electricity. So that's why they can't figure out why the light lights up at night. Now, over here to the right, we have James Donahue, and we keep talking about limbs tonight. Unfortunately, he lost a leg in the Civil War. Right. And try to imagine the existence of a guy who had to go out on that pier. It's about 100 feet out to the end there, 5 or 6 times a day, dragging his wooden leg It was pretty tough. And now he exists in the afterlife in his old house, which you see below. Now that's been turned into a lighthouse museum. This is actually in South Haven, and it's worth the trip. It's a really interesting place. But a lot of times the people that work there can hear something upstairs. They'll hear a thump, 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 and it's just James Donahue maybe enjoying his long-deserved rest.
Now, of course, a state that's surrounded by the Great Lakes is going to have a lot of ship sinking tragedies. And every time a ship goes down, it runs the risk of becoming a ghost ship. And there are many of those. More than 5,000 ships have gone down in the Great Lakes. And if you see them again after they're long lost, we call those Flying Dutchmen. The most famous of the Flying Dutchmen was undoubtedly Le Griffon. It was the flagship of Cadillac's fleet. It was the largest ship ever introduced to the Great Lakes when it was brought in 1697. Unfortunately, it was lost forever when it went from Detroit to Green Bay.
And that's where the tradition started, folks, of Detroit going to Green Bay and losing, which the Lions have continued.
Now, no one knows what became of the Griffin, but it is seen in the fog at night sometimes by many people, as a lot of the Flying Dutchmen are. Now, you can visit a haunted ship yourself, as Gail told you earlier. You can go to Bay City and see the USS Edson. It's a Vietnam-era destroyer. It was built in 1958. It's an extremely haunted structure. They have a lot of ghost hunters go on there and do investigations. You can go in there and you'll hear people talking on the PA that aren't there. You'll hear people running up and down the corridors and big iron doors slamming. And one of the strangest things is when people get out of the tour, sometimes their car is running in the parking lot.
That is going to come in so handy when we get to winter here. Now, this next one is one of Michigan's oldest legends. It takes place in Forester, which is near Port Huron. And what's interesting about this one is it's about a real person. You can actually go visit her grave. Her name was Minnie Quay. She was a 15-year-old girl, and she had a boyfriend who was a sailor who was lost at sea. She was so despondent, and people saw her doing this. She walked past that hotel, which still exists, down to the water, and walked out this long pier and jumped to her death and drowned. And you can still see the pilings there. It happens to be on the cover of our book of where Minnie walked. And now her legend still goes on because people will see a girl out in Lake Huron waving with her long flowing hair. And a couple of people have actually drowned thinking they needed to save someone, and they get out there and there is no one there. And you can hear the Ballad of Minnie Quay online. And again, you can visit her grave. So here's a legend about a person that we know existed. Now, listen up, folks, because this is where you could win some real cash. This is a mystery that needs to be solved, and maybe you'll solve it.
Right.
This is the Paulding Lights, which is up in Watersmeet, Michigan. And, John?
Well, I'll tell you what. People go and they see the Paulding Lights all the time. Now, many of you may have seen them yourself. Up in the Upper Peninsula, almost to the Wisconsin border, is a little town called Watersmeet. This is the only phenomenon of a haunted nature that is recognized by the National Park Service. And you can see Casper the Friendly Ghost there on the sign in the lower right there, in the lower left, rather. Now, for some reason, every night people will gather along the road you see pictured, and they will actually see the Paulding Lights. These are actual pictures. They look like. Yeah. This is what they look like. These lights come in from the distance. They hover overhead. They change colors, and then they disappear. Now, what's causing this? It's been going on for over 100 years. No one knows. Even people from Michigan Tech have been out there. They suspect it's something to do with what we call deflection of light. But in 1966, Ripley's Believe It or Not offered $100,000 to anyone who could explain what is happening and why there are the Paulding Lights.
Well, and we always say, especially if we're in person, let's all jump in a van. It's only 12 hours to get up to Watersmeet, and it's a pretty good payday. If one of you can decide what it is, we can all divide up the $100,000. No one has taken us up on this yet, but we would love to be in on the money if anybody can solve it. of course, the legend is that it's a phantom brakeman, but it's a really interesting thing, and it's very Michigan. People literally come from all over the world to see these lights, and it's really quite an interesting phenomena. Now, John and I love old theaters. We've traveled throughout Michigan looking at them, and this is one of our favorites, again, in Bay City. It's got a Mayan theme. Look how beautiful that is. These pictures do not do it justice. It's a beautifully restored theater. It was built by the guy who built the Fox Theater in Detroit, architecture. But what's fun about this is they dedicated a seat to a ghost. There was a manager of the theater named Floyd who was murdered in the 40s, and people kept claiming that he would come back to the theater. They would see his ghost. So look on the seat there. They put a plaque that says Ghost of the State Theater. And even if the place is sold out, they always keep that seat for Floyd. They keep it empty. Sometimes people claim they can see him sitting in there. So that's very fun, a ghost seat in a theater. And speaking of theaters, if you're ever in the UP, a lot of people do not know about Calumet, which has this beautiful opera house. You know, there's a lot of mining that went on there, and people came over from Europe, and they were used to these grand opera houses. And this is a grand opera house in Calumet.
Oh, yeah.
And it's haunted by a ghost of an actress who used to perform there. Her name was Madame Modjeska, and she was this very classically trained Polish actress. And people claim that when they put on shows there, and they're standing on the stage and they forget their lines for a bit, they'll look out in the balcony, and there's Madame Modjeska whispering the lines to them. And I always wonder if she's speaking in English or Polish, because my father was Polish, and it's a very hard language to understand. Now, behind me is Fort Wayne.
Yeah, Gail, get out of that haunted tunnel.
Yeah, get out of there.
Get out of that haunted tunnel. Fort Wayne in Detroit is one of Michigan's most haunted places. And it was, and it's often investigated again by ghost hunters. It was built in 1843 for a war that never took place. It was called the Patriots' War. We were going to go to war with Canada. Thank goodness that didn't happen, but we did get some of the great chocolates and stuff from over there. But it is a very haunted place, maybe because it was built on top of 13, count them, 13 burial mounds, Native American burial mounds. And there's one of them you can actually see there in the bottom left. Now, everything about Fort Wayne is haunted, apparently. The tunnels, the little barracks houses, the areas around the walls. And if you're in the barracks, people have reported seeing soldiers marching by. Now, that's a little odd because usually they're on the third floor, and wherever the soldiers are marching, it's about 75 feet off the ground. So pretty haunted.
And nearby, oh yeah, and nearby we have a haunted library. We always like to put in for Uma and everybody else some haunted libraries.
Right.
Now this is the. I'll show you what it looks like.
Something funny. Oh yeah, haunted libraries. Okay.
Haunted libraries. We have several in the book, including one in Muskegon, the Hackley Library, that is haunted by the guy who donated the money for it. That's a good place for him. But this is the Skillman Library. It's a branch of the Detroit Public Library, and it's on Library Street in Gratiot. But it started as a jail, and before it was a jail, it was the site of the last public execution in Michigan in 1830. Stephen G. Simmons was hanged for murdering his wife, and you can see a picture of it on the left there. There's an engraving. And it was interesting. After the before Stephen G. Simmons was hung, he was very contrite. He sang hymns, he apologized, and it was so moving to the crowd. Afterwards, they met and decided that would be the last execution in Michigan. They abolished capital punishment, and it was the first state in America, Michigan was the first state in America to abolish capital punishment after this very hanging. And on these grounds, they built the Detroit jail. Then they tore down the jail and built a library, and you can see what it looked like in 1877 and now what it looks like today. And it's interesting, in this library, people report hearing chains rattling. They see people wearing old-fashioned prison clothes. And the most important thing is that they shush. They should be shushing in the library, no matter what.
Be careful you don't have any late fees, right?
Here's our romantic ghosts in the this is all the way up in Holland. You can tour this place, this beautiful mansion built by a man named Dora Felt. He invented something called the comptometer, which as far as we can tell, was a very fancy adding machine. He made millions of dollars on it. He built this beautiful mansion for his wife, Agnes. You can see her below. She died, unfortunately, right after they moved in. He died soon after. But at night, people report seeing them waltzing through the mansion together. Now we've got an exclusive haunted story from John.
That's right. That's right. You're guaranteed once in a while you check out these public haunted places, you're going to run into a ghost. Now, the Jackson Antique Mall is, of course, in downtown Jackson. You see it, the building in the upper left there. And it was originally a brothel, and it was run by a woman named Blanche. Well, Blanche loves to play tricks on all the people that are there. The clerks, the people that work there will tell you she moves things around. She bangs things. She'll move ladders away from the wall. If they yell at her, she'll move things right back in front of them. And one day I was there with a friend. We were walking downstairs. And just as a joke, I'd heard about Blanche. I said, "How you doing today, Blanche?" And suddenly, to our surprise, all around us, we heard this voice of an elder lady say, "I'm fine." And we were just stunned. We heard the same thing at the exact same time. We told the clerk at the front of the building, and she just laughed. She said, "Yeah, Blanche loves to talk to people. She does it all the time." So you might actually run into Blanche if you go by there.
Boo! I'll scare you with that slide. It scared us. Even down at the DIA, they have hauntings. This is a nail figure, an African nail figure, a very famous part of their collection. And the guards told us at night, sometimes they see this little guy running around. We would be scared to see it in the daytime, but it's interesting. And then look to the right there. There's this huge painting called the Court of Death. It's in a gallery, and sometimes at night, the guards will hear a tremendous crash. They run into that gallery. They think that painting is falling down and there on the wall. So even museums can be haunted. Now, here's one of our favorite places in the book. Maybe you've been there to celebrate something special. This is the Whitney, and this mansion was built, a 12,000 square foot mansion was built by lumber baron David Whitney. He built it in 1894, and he spent $400,000 to build it because his wife wanted the grandest palace in Detroit, and she sure got it because that would cost $9.5 million to build today. Right. And it had the first private elevator in Detroit, in the whole city. It's a beautiful beautiful mansion, but unfortunately Flora, his wife, died before it could be completed. So he married her sister, and she was not having it. Right. And she haunts this beautiful place. People see Flora all the time moaning and complaining about the place that she never got to live in. Of course, you want to live there because look, folks, they have Tiffany windows there. They have beautiful carved wood. It is really worth it, especially during the holidays. And they really love to talk about their hauntings. They have seances there. And even they have on the third floor, they have the ghost bar. And they have drinks named after Flora and her poor sister, Sarah. And it's just a very interesting place. If you go online, you can even see videos of the elevator going up and down without anybody even being in there. Now, I was a tour guide at Greenfield Village for a while. Great job, but they do not want you to talk about hauntings. And because it's an educational place, but there's lots of stories about people who've seen haunted things. If you've seen anything haunted there, do let us know in the chat. The Wright brothers' home is famously haunted. Sometimes you will go outside and the door is locked from the inside and no one can get in. You have to go get a key. So the Wright brothers are playing with us. And even in the Noah Webster house, children report seeing Noah Webster wandering around. And here on the upper left is a Henry Ford homestead where a lot of guides, not me, but have seen the spinning wheel going and books moving. But now John has a story about the Logan County Courthouse where Lincoln practiced law.
That's right. And this is actually the only ghost story we include that is not a ghost story, but it's wonderful. In the late 30s, they thought, well, wouldn't it be great to have someone dress up as Abe Lincoln and give a tour of the Logan County Courthouse? And so that's what they did. They got this old fella to put on the stovepipe hat and so forth. And one night, just around closing time, he got a little drowsy and he fell asleep in a chair in the Logan County Courthouse. And about an hour later, the old security guard came in to check on the place. And lo and behold, he startled Abe Lincoln awake. And he about gave the security guard a heart attack. He went out and he quit that night.
And I think he probably quit drinking too when you see old Abe like that. And of course, nearby is where Henry Ford died in 1947, the beautiful Fairlane estate. Lots of haunted stories. People have been filled in years before, but people hear people swimming in there all the time. There's also haunted servants. People regularly on tours will see a haunted butler carrying a drink around. But our favorite story is the garage down there. Look at that beautiful garage. People have reported, especially at night, seeing a haunted chauffeur, a ghost of a chauffeur, polishing some of Henry Ford's cars. And, you know, with help is hard to get these days, he actually still is able to employ haunted ghost servants. So we think that's pretty interesting. Now, we always love to end our talk on Houdini because, and folks, this is getting to be the anniversary when Houdini died in Detroit, October 31st, 1926. Now, Houdini considered Detroit his second home and performed many of his famous stunts. He first performed them in Detroit. He'd come back again and again. People loved him here. And you can see him on the left there. That's the old Belle Bridge. In 1906, he did that famous stunt that if you've seen the movie many years ago on Houdini in the 60s with Tony Curtis, he did that stunt where he went under the ice in a straitjacket and was able to come up from the ice. That was done at the Belle Isle Bridge. And here we have on the right, the Detroit Creamery Company. My grandfather was a milkman, and they put Houdini in a 75-gallon container of milk and miraculously escaped from that. And if he died, we call that death by vitamin D, but it was a pretty interesting stunt. Now here, many of you might remember the Fife building. It's still there in downtown Detroit. It was the largest shoe store in the world for a while. And here Houdini did one of his famous escapes, again in a straitjacket hanging upside down from the 14th floor of the Fife building. Who sponsored that? Look to the left. It's J.L. Hudson Company. And they even did something where he attempted to escape from a special packing box that J.L. Hudson Company prepared for him. So again, he would return to Detroit again and again. And here we are now up to 1926. Now, a lot of times Houdini would appear at the Majestic Theatre, which is still going strong. You can see it on the upper left. And they claim to see his ghost there. But his last performance was actually in a theater called the Garrick, which was located right next to where American Coney Island is on Lafayette. They're actually, this week, folks, they're selling something they call the Houdini Weenie. I didn't make that up. And the proceeds from it support autism charities. So check that out as well. Now, Houdini came from Montreal. His last performance, he had a fever of 104. He really should have gone to the doctor. But he came on the train. He was very sick. And he performed because the Garrick Theater had a clause that if you didn't perform, you had to pay the equivalent of $15,000 to the Garrick Theater. That's the equivalent of today's money. And Houdini didn't want to pay the money, so he went on, even though he was very, very sick. He went on October 26th. That was his last performance. He was so sick that he was dragged off the stage. His doctors took him back to his hotel at the Statler, and then they took him to Grace Hospital in Detroit. You can see it on the upper left there. It looks pretty haunted. Yeah. And that's where he lay in a coma for several days and died on October 31st, 1926. So we're coming up to the anniversary. And John found this death certificate here, an infection, and he was only 53 years old. And so many scholars say that if he had just gone to see the doctor about the infection when he was in Montreal, he would be alive today. And his body was laid out in a funeral home. That's still in Midtown next to Slows to Go. It was briefly a musical school, and people claim there to have seen Houdini wandering through there as well. Now, Houdini's wife believed in the afterlife, although Houdini himself did not. Here's even a poster. He went on speaking tours. Do spirits return? Houdini says no. But his wife missed him so much, she tried to contact him, and for 10 years, she came to the Masonic Temple and did a seance. And the secret word they were supposed to say, the secret phrase Houdini was supposed to say to contact her was Rosabelle Believe. And that was a song that Houdini and his wife sang together in the early days of vaudeville. So Mrs. Houdini's wife came for 10 years. She held the seance. And then she said, 10 years was long enough to wait for any man. And she stopped coming. But magicians have come from all over the world and will continue to come. They're probably here right now.
Yeah.
Every year they come to Detroit and they try and contact Houdini. So far, no luck. And many of you may know Holland, Michigan, which is near Marshall, it's considered the magic capital of the world. Why? Blackstone, the famous magician, had land near there, and he sort of established a magician's colony and a famous magic company, which still exists, the Abbott Magic Company. So magicians came all over the world to Holland, Michigan, and there's a fabulous museum, American Museum of Magic in Marshall nearby. And if you happen to be in Colon, this is a great time of year to walk through some cemeteries. There's some very haunted cemeteries there, including this one that contain all the famous magicians of the world. And you may see Houdini there as well. You never know. But we hope this is the year that Houdini decides to return to Detroit once and for all.
Yeah.
Well, we thank you so much for coming out on this dark and maybe stormy night. Not stormy yet. We appreciate you hanging out with us. And as we said, we hope we didn't scare you too much. We would love if you'd go on our Facebook page, like our Facebook page. We'll tell you about upcoming appearances and post some spooky pictures. We also sell our book. If you want to have a signed copy, we're happy to mail it to you for free. It's $20. I'll put the address in the chat. We'll send you a signed copy, and you can have one of your very own, or it's available in bookstores as well. But now I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to you folks. You've been very patient. So now it's your chance to either tell us some spooky stories or some places that you think should be in our book, or we'd love someone out there to tell us about Luke the Spook, which we know is a Clinton Township, Macomb County legend, and we'd love to know more about it. And we want you guys to tell us as well. So again, thank you very, very much for listening to our stories tonight.
Thank you, Gail, and it was wonderful information. Oh my gosh, I was a little bit scary to see this really. I know it was really good information, and although I'm living here for the past 30 years, I have never been to like these places, like ghost stories. I have not heard about it. It's a very good information, and I did not see any of facts or question answers from our attendees. That means I think they know. I mean, you would have given them good information.
Well, we must have somebody out there who can tell us about Luke the Spook, or if they've seen it, because it's on Romeo Plank Bridge nearby. So can somebody fill us all in about the legend that's out there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, somebody has. Yeah, there is one.
I put in the chat where you can get our email. Just write to us too if you have any. A lot of times when we're in person, people are too embarrassed to tell us their ghost stories, and so they wait till everybody leaves and then they whisper it to us. So you could whisper it to us in the chat if you have some spooky story you'd like to share with us.
And also, they can share their stories to email address. They have my email address, or you have given, or anytime they can share, and then I can send it to you. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Joan and Gail, for having you here, and it's a wonderful information and excellent presentation.
Oh, would
we
you like to hear?
Enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, John was going to tell us scary. He lived in a haunted house. If you had time, but if not, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, if you get if you get the book, you'll see in the introduction I talk about that. Now, as Gail said, we don't mention a lot of people's haunted houses because they're not public places. But it was one of the reasons we decided to write the book. I had a house in Dearborn. It was a house that had a flat on the main floor and a flat on the second floor. And my tenant informed me, he said, I think this place is haunted. And lo and behold, from that point on, we were noticing all kinds of strange goings on. For instance, the tub water would go on in the middle of the night, full blast. And it would take 4 turns to turn it off. Something was pushing him over in the middle of the night when he'd go to use the bathroom. And we would hear all kinds of running around upstairs when no one was up there. And one night when I was leaving, and no one lived there but me at that time, I got back and every light in the house was on. The basement, the main floor, the upstairs, there were lights that I didn't even know existed in that house on. And I was a little creeped out by it. It took me about a half an hour to go in and investigate it. So very strange things that were going on in that house. And one time I was hearing a lot of running upstairs, again, when no one else was there. And it was 3 a.m. and I yelled, "Stop it." And immediately it stopped.
Oh, wow. That was so awesome. I know. Oh, I got to go to sleep, John, and I know.
There you are. Well, I'll tell you, it's a little odd. Anyway, there's more of that in the book as well. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. And we love sharing that stuff with everyone.
Wow, it is wonderful
Such
program.
a shy audience.
I know.
Feel free to write to us, and we hope you have a wonderful Halloween, and we hope you go out among Michigan and discover your own scary places and tell us about it. It's a great way to learn about Michigan around you. And it's funny, we have kids that sometimes come and they learn. It's fun to learn about Michigan through haunted stories. So anything to get people to discover our state, we're good with.
Yeah, thank you. And a lot of people have, some people have expressed their things. It's a very nice program, and then can't wait my book to arrive. And a lot of people have written, and thanks, Jackie. Oh, you already put everybody there? Okay, good.
Yeah, I just put our, and please go on our Facebook page, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from our audience. So
yeah, thank you very much, Joan and Gail again, and I really appreciate. Happy Halloween to you too, and thank you all for attending this program, and we really enjoyed it. We'd love to see you again for a different type of programs like this, and thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.